Welcome back. You're watching Live from Paris on France 24. The top stories this hour. President Trump fires his Secretary of State and nominates the head of the CIA to replace him. Rex Tillerson served as America's top diplomat for just over a year. Straight to California for the president, who's inspecting a prototype for his proposed border wall with Mexico. He was greeted by angry protesters in the Democratic stronghold. And with the UK all the way, the United States backs the British government over its call for Russia to explain how a deadly nerve agent was used to try and kill a former Russian spy in England. Theresa May has given Vladimir Putin until midnight to explain what happened. First, though, President Trump has fired his Secretary of State and says the head of the CIA will now replace him. Rex Tillerson was fired via Twitter. He's the fifth senior member of the Trump administration to leave in just 2 weeks. Speaking to reporters earlier, Trump said the two men had disagreed on a number of issues, not least over the nuclear deal with Iran.
It's been very good, and Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same. With Mike Pompeo, we have a very similar thought process. I think it's going to go very well.
Well, Tillerson also made a statement. There was no mention of Trump, though, or of his work over the last few months. He did, though, have a message for Russia.
And much work remains to respond to the troubling behavior and actions on the part of the Russian government. Russia must assess carefully as to how its actions are in the best interest of the Russian people and of the world more broadly. Continuing on their current trajectory is likely to lead to greater isolation on their part, a situation which is not in anyone's interest.
So what about Mike Pompeo, the man set to take over as America's top diplomat? Well, the CIA intelligence director is a Trump loyalist, and many of his views do lie outside the political mainstream, as Erin Ogunke now reports.
He is said to be one of Donald Trump's favorites. Now, after 14 months as CIA director, Mike Pompeo is set to replace Rex Tillerson as top diplomat of the United States. And unlike his predecessor, he is known for his political alignment with the president.
I've worked with Mike Pompeo now for quite some time. Tremendous energy, tremendous intellect. We're always on the same wavelength. The relationship has been very good, and that's what I need as Secretary of State.
Mike Pompeo attended the prestigious military academy West Point and served in the Army for 5 years. He was elected to the House of Representatives as a Tea Party Republican in 2010. He solidified his reputation as a staunch conservative when he served on the House Select Benghazi Committee, the special panel that investigated the 2012 killing of a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans in Benghazi. He became a leading voice against Hillary Clinton, which reportedly contributed to Donald Trump's decision to name him CIA director. Pompeo was one of the most politicized directors of the American intelligence agency. He opposed Barack Obama's plan to close Guantanamo Bay and defended the CIA's use of torture under George W. Bush. And while he has publicly supported last year's intelligence report concluding that Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election, he has often downplayed the extent of the Kremlin's influence. Perhaps most importantly, Mike Pompeo echoes President Trump's hardline stances on Iran and North Korea.
We're going to work hard to make sure that we get what it is the president has set out very clearly for his entire time in office, which is the complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea.
The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee will hold a hearing in April to consider Pompeo's nomination.
Well, to talk about that and more broadly about US foreign policy under Donald Trump, I'm joined in the studio by Annie Cizel. She's a specialist in American foreign policy at the Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, Trump's new Secretary of State is a loyalist. He's been described as a yes man, somebody who will do what the president wants. What does that mean for the major US foreign policy issues of the day, most notably Iran and North Korea?
Well, what it means first is that sort of circle that had been built around Trump to try and contain President Trump somehow, with an axis that was running from the State Department, Rex Tillerson, to the Defense Department and Jim Mattis, who's probably very isolated tonight. It means that this circle's been broken, and that another alignment is now coming up between Mike Pompeo at the head of the State Department, Nikki Haley as U.S. ambassador at the United Nations, of a more hardline, potentially hawkish, and more nationalistic type of foreign policy. Meaning it's definitely in line with the protectionism we've heard about, the steel and all this, these past few weeks. So what President Trump is doing now is really unraveling his program, his campaign program, which was sort of sidelined in foreign policy to a certain extent by Secretary of State Tillerson, and he's now bringing it back where he wanted it to be, that is hawkish, but potentially at least on North Korea and Iran.
So what does that mean? Does that mean sitting down and talking to Kim Jong-un? Does it mean tearing up the nuclear agreement with Iran?
Possibly both. Possibly both, because President Trump has been saying that, okay, dialogue is okay with North Korea, but it's going to be a hardline type of dialogue, dialogue with all options on the table, as Jim Mattis would have it. And definitely Mike Pompeo's declarations that we've just listened to again go that way. And also further replacement may be, we don't know, but maybe on the agenda of President Trump. I mean, there's been talk in Washington these past few days that H.R. McMaster, his current national security advisor, might be on the way out. Might be. We'll see. But if such was the case, among the potential nominees to replace him are John Bolton. John Bolton used to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations under George W. Bush, and is an extreme hardliner, definitely hawkish on both North Korea and Iran. So it means very strong dialogue, very muscular type of diplomacy, leverage type diplomacy. The sanctions are still heavily on North Korea, and there's no dialogue against sanctions on Trump's agenda right now. The sanctions are going to stay on.
What about the traditional post-war alliances, the post-war order? Because Donald Trump has made it clear that he doesn't really understand why America should financially support European countries within NATO. And he's just announced these trade tariffs, which will disproportionately hurt Europe. Where do you see that relationship going?
More and more unilateralism. I mean, that's what he's been doing ever since he entered the White House. And it's somehow what's happened today makes it even more coherent with what he proclaimed he was going to do. This sort of not just distrust, but defiance of the international world order, of the Pax Americana, as it's been called since 1945. These constant attacks against the multilateral institutions, whether they be the United Nations and all the agencies within the UN, whether it be the World Trade Organization or NATO. He's been attacking multilateralism on all sides, and definitely we shouldn't expect from the current replacements, unless Mike Pompeo surprises us, which is possible as well. I mean, he is a true Republican Party member, which Trump was not. He is someone who is possibly going to work closer with Congress. And definitely there are unilateralists within the Republican Party. And this is the line we've known with George W. Bush and the opening 21st century. So chances are this is the way we're going to go. But to what extent Mike Pompeo is going to be as much of a unilateralist as Donald Trump seems to be, we can't tell. The two men are not on the same planet for everything. Russia is something that does oppose them, and definitely Pompeo is more wary of Russia than President Trump ever was. So we'll see to what extent these different planets right now, Pompeo, Nikki Haley, the new head of the CIA, and President Trump are aligned. And really what we need to watch for now is where the National Security Advisor is going to be and where the Secretary of Defense is going to be. Because Jim Mattis was the strong man on whom Donald Trump was relying so far. To what extent Mattis and Pompeo are going to be working hand in hand and in such friendship almost, as Mattis was working with Tillerson. This is what we need to be looking for now and see where this takes the U.S. attitude towards the international community.
Annick Cizal, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, with Mike Pompeo moving on, for the first time, a woman has been chosen to head up the CIA. Gina Haspel has 30 years' experience as an intelligence officer, but she is a controversial figure. She ran a prison in Thailand where suspected members of al-Qaeda were waterboarded in 2002. The so-called black sites, secret locations where the CIA carried out what it termed enhanced interrogation techniques, were closed by the former President Barack Obama. A congressional hearing must confirm her nomination, but she is expected to take that post. Well, it was straight back to business as usual for Trump after he sacked his Secretary of State. He's arrived in California, where he's been inspecting prototypes of the wall he wants to build along the border with Mexico. His visit to this Democratic stronghold is the first since he became president. California has been at the forefront of his resistance to his anti-immigration policies. Here's what he had to say a short while ago.
The border wall is truly our first line of defense. It'll save thousands and thousands of lives, save taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars by reducing crime, drug flow, welfare fraud, and burdens on schools and hospitals. The wall will save hundreds of billions of dollars, many, many times what it's going to cost.
Well, Trump has given his support to the UK over the attempted murder of a former Russian spy in England. The White House says Trump spoke on the phone to the British Prime Minister Theresa May and agrees that Russia must provide some answers. May's given Putin until midnight to explain why a deadly nerve agent developed by Moscow was found in the UK. Otherwise, she says the UK will take additional measures, including closing down the Russia Today rolling news channel. Moscow says if that happens, it will oust every British media outlet from its territory. Robert Sutton-Maddox has more.
Refusing to name any official suspect at this stage, British police said they would leave no stone unturned in their investigation into the poisoning of a former Russian agent.
We are sifting and assessing all evidence available, and we are exploring all investigative avenues. This includes extensive CCTV footage from across the city and over 380 exhibits so far.
Last Sunday, former Russian spy turned British double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious on a bench in the English town of Salisbury. In the House of Commons, British Prime Minister Theresa May said the pair had been poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent and gave Russia until the end of Tuesday to explain how the substance ended up in the United Kingdom. The British Home Secretary Amber Rudd chaired a meeting of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee to discuss the response.
The investigation is going well. This is detailed, painstaking work with over 250 police officers in the area conducting this work. Well, the Russians have started responding. The Prime Minister has been very clear that they have until midnight tonight to satisfy her requests.
Earlier, Rudd said the security services would investigate allegations of Russian state involvement in 14 deaths over recent years on British soil. Russia has denied it was involved in Skripal's poisoning and requested access to the nerve agent, but says Britain has refused it.
Russia is not guilty. Russia is ready to cooperate in the framework of the Chemical Weapons Convention only if the United Kingdom takes the pains to fulfill its legal obligations, according to the same document.
Skripal, a former Russian military intelligence officer, became a British double agent in the 1990s. He was jailed in Russia in 2006 for revealing state secrets and later freed in a spy swap.
Well, that's it from me, but do stay with us on France 24. Georgia Calvin-Smith up next with all the top stories from across Africa this Tuesday. That's next.